We welcome you and everybody to another installment of Fielding the 68 brought to you by Rhythm. I'm Faxon Childress alongside Wachtel and Lukas Harkins. We got a lot to talk about over the course of the program today, including biggest winner talk, biggest loser talk, and number one seed talk here in the first segment. And then we're going to break down the bubble and do some deep dives into everybody's favorite teams in the final segment. So let's talk here in this first segment, starting with Lukas, about the biggest winners of this past weekend in the college basketball world.
Yeah, for one, I remember talking on the show on Friday. We were asked about Big Ten teams that can reach the number 2 seed line, and if 3 teams could all be on the 2. And I didn't think that was possible. I still don't necessarily, but at the time, I kind of ruled out Michigan State, and that was a mistake. Michigan State obviously continues to play very, very well. Its resume continues to get better. They were a big winner, getting up towards that 2-3 line today. My other big winner for me was Boise State. I know other teams got better individual wins, and they deserve to be winners as well, whether that's Indiana, Arkansas, Oklahoma, BYU. But Boise had a really, really interesting and really important combination of results. Not only did they win at home not only did they follow up their home win over New Mexico with a road win at Nevada, but Clemson and St. Mary's continue to be really good. The Tigers and Gales are looking like 5 or 6 seeds right now, and Boise beat both in non-conference. So they now have 3 wins over the field, and 2 of them are hinging on protected seed level quality wins.
Yeah, there's some great points, Lukas. Brad, let's talk biggest winners from this past weekend in college hoops.
I thought there were a good amount of big winners. Oregon at Wisconsin was a big one. Oregon's had dropped down all the way to a number 8 seed for me. Winning at Wisconsin, I mean, their numbers against their opponents are pretty staggering, considering they've had like a tale of 3 seasons. But Oregon right now is 9-6 against quad 1 opponents, 12-8 against quad 1 and 2 opponents. That's some strong numbers. 9 wins is tied for the second most in the country. So big win for them. And, some other teams that had some great wins. Oklahoma beating Mississippi State just to stay in the field for me. That was very important. Vanderbilt beating Ole Miss. BYU winning at Arizona. I'm not going to say it locked up a spot for them, but they're pretty much good to go, barring a complete collapse. And then the last winners, I will say, from the weekend, VCU, UC San Diego, and Drake. They all won their games, but with the way the bubble is starting to shape up, those 3 teams are currently automatic bids, but I think all 3 of them are still in play for an at-large bid. And I think with the way they're playing, with their way their metrics line up against other at-large teams, especially the at-large teams from these power conferences, they're right there. Will they be there in a couple weeks? We don't know that answer. But if the season ended today, I think they're absolutely in the mix for at-large bids.
Yeah, that's a great point, Brad, as the Tritons currently sitting at 24-4. And then obviously we know what Drake's been able to accomplish this year. And it started in the non-con for Drake as well. They're 25-3. Bennett Stur's coming off a 19-10 game. So it's been fun to watch them play in year 1 for McCollum at Drake. Let's talk biggest losers from this past weekend, Brad, and maybe a team that's being brought up in the chat by, it appears to be some SEC fans, asking why SMU is even being considered in the bubble at this point after their last quad 1 opportunity this past weekend. They lost it to Clemson in Dallas.
Yeah, SMU still not at full strength. We have to remember that loss. But the issue with SMU is they haven't beaten anybody. They're 0-5 against quad 1 opponents, but they have strong metrics. They've beaten all the teams they're supposed to beat. They just haven't beaten any of the good ones. But they're hanging around because of their metrics: 43 strength of record, 47 KPI, top 50 WAB. So they're hanging around even though they haven't beaten anybody. The issue for SMU is they don't play anybody else that's in the field in the rest of the regular season. So what they're going to have to do is they have to win out, and they're probably going to have to beat somebody of note in the ACC tournament for them to get a bid. But sometimes beating all the teams that you're supposed to beat could be good enough depending on who you're going up against the bubble. And then a couple other teams who I felt like were big losers this week. Texas losing at South Carolina, just a quadrant 2 loss, but South Carolina was winless in the SEC. It's a problem for a team sitting on the bubble to lose to the last place team in the league. And then also Gonzaga. Gonzaga losing to St. Mary's at home. Gonzaga just has 2 wins over the field. And, what have you done for me lately? And the Zags have not really made a case for them to be a good seed, let alone be in the field at this point in the season.
Yeah, those are great points. And Lucas, throwing things to you now. Who do you feel like were some of the biggest losers of this past weekend?
Brad hit on my whole list. So he hit on all my losers for the weekend. I think the thing with SMU is when you get down towards the bubble here and the teams that are on the outside looking in and the first few teams out of the field, obviously there are teams that don't fit this criteria. But like SMU being 0-5 in quadrant 1 games, you compare that to Georgia still in the mix, 2-11, Cincinnati 1-9, North Carolina 1-10, Xavier 1-9. Some of those teams are going to be in the first 8 out, and SMU is among them. They've had less at bats than those teams, so they're still in the mix. As Brad mentioned, with the metrics that are on their side, I don't think that the committee would take a whole lot into effect playing without Boobie Miller in these 2 losses to Wake and Clemson, because they played poorly in quad 1 games with him, and did play poorly without him against Clemson as well. But 15-7 against the upper 3 quadrants. I don't think that's enough to put them in the field, and they aren't in the field for me. Spoiler for later. But I think it's too early to rule them out with the ACC tournament left. Potential games with Duke, Clemson, Louisville, and North Carolina still are all quad 1 at a neutral site.
Yeah, those are some great points. And Lucas, want to give you a chance to expand, and then we can wrap back to Brad as well before we reveal the 1 seeds. Gonzaga seems to be one of the most interesting case studies in college basketball right now because of some of the metrics versus the actual results on the court. What are your thoughts on the Zags as of right now and kind of where they stand in this picture, Lucas?
Your guess is as good as mine right now. I mean, they have such an interesting profile that makes it almost impossible to figure out. They're 46th on average across resume metrics. That barely puts them in the field if it does. If you're looking at just pure resume metrics across the board, and they're top 15 in all 3 quality metrics. As Brad indicated, they don't have many wins over the field. They're 6-8 against the upper 2 quadrants. They're a team that's likely to be underseeded based on their quality metrics and what they are basically projected to be able to do, but they haven't actually done any of that to this point. So I think you're going to see them very commonly slotted around a 9-10 seed line right now, despite having the quality per BPI KenPom and T-Rank of a top 4 seed.
Yeah, it's just such a weird dynamic to see a team 14 on T-Rank, 10 in the net, all the metrics seemingly checking out at a lot of spots. But talking about an 8, 9, or 10 seed right now, Brad, is that kind of the way you're seeing the situation up in Spokane?
Yeah, I have them currently as a number 9 seed. And like Lucas said, if they end up as a 9 or a 10 seed, they're going to be favored. If they're a 10 or even an 11 seed, they're going to be favored in their first round NCAA tournament game. So it's going to be one of those like, oh, everybody's picking Gonzaga. Well, Gonzaga is going to be the better team based on predictive metrics, their KenPoms, their BPIs, their Torvik rank. One other thing about Gonzaga, strength of record of 51, KPI of 40. Last year, the team with the worst average of those two was to get in that large bid was Michigan State, which was about 47.5, depending on when the season ended. So right now, Gonzaga is right in that range, slightly better, but they have to they gotta win games. I mean, they still have some more games they have to play that aren't necessarily going to improve their stock. But another loss or two, and things really start to get interesting.
Yeah, I mean, as an exercise, if Gonzaga was to slip to the 10 seed line, even they wouldn't just be favorites in the first round; they'd be favorites over half the 2 seeds. Using metrics, like they're a higher rated metrics team across BPI, KenPom, and T-Rank, which most people would use as favorites or underdogs for betting purposes. They would be ahead of Wisconsin, Michigan State, Texas A&M. They'd all be ranked higher.
And obviously, it goes without saying, Mark Few's had a great run of success. I think it's like 8 straight Sweet 16s or something for Gonzaga. So even if they are in that seed line that wanes to the 10 range, you could be favorites in back-to-back matchups with a chance to make that another Sweet 16 appearance in Spokane. So interested to see how all that shakes out, to say the least, in one of the more interesting case studies we've seen in recent years. Let's take a look now at our 1 seeds. Don't think we're going to see a lot of deviation from Friday's show here. It's the same 4: Auburn, Duke, Alabama, and Florida. Brad, I'll give you the floor first and let you pick whatever 2 and throw the other 2 to Lucas.
Yeah, so I think Duke right now, I'll take the top 2, Auburn and Duke. I think Duke right now surpassed Alabama Some people already had them past Alabama, but especially after this weekend, you totally uh, beat the heck out of Illinois at Madison Square Garden, to put it nicely. So I have Duke as my overall 2 number seed. They currently have the #1 KenPom in the country. Auburn is #2. Auburn's 19-2 against quad 1 and 2 opponents, which is by far the best record. 14-2 against quad 1 opponents for Auburn. Like, there's no team that even comes close to that. So right now there's Auburn and there's really everybody else. Whether that gap gets a little bit closer as we get towards conference tournament play is to be determined. But right now, Auburn sits way above everybody, and Duke has a slight, maybe a nice edge over Alabama for the second overall #1 seed.
Lucas, talk a little bit about how you're seeing the other two, and then some thoughts on Duke if you have those as well.
I think Brad's right that it's Auburn and then everyone, but I'd kind of even extend it a little further. It's Auburn and then Duke, Bama, Florida, Houston, Tennessee, and then everyone else. Like, I think you can make an argument for Houston or Tennessee for a 1 seed over at Bama or Florida right now. And that's just because of how close those are. It's nothing against Bama or Florida. Houston and Tennessee would be historically excellent 2 seeds. As it stands right now, I think that those 4 teams are competing for those last 2 1 seeds. I still have Duke a touch ahead. As Brad indicated, not only is Duke #1 in KenPom, they're #1 in KenPom by a pretty wide margin. They're 38.13 across their adjusted net rating right now. Auburn's 35.91. That's over 2 points difference. I think Duke has a little bit of an edge as a result of that over the Alabama, Florida. And then Houston and Tennessee are right there in the mix too. I mean, it wouldn't surprise me if either of those teams were 1 seeds in the committee's eyes today, let alone in 2 weeks.
So I guess that breeds the question, and I'm sure we're going to talk about this in the final segment as well, but how important is the big game tonight between Houston and Texas Tech for Houston's chances at a 1 seed? And then how are we kind of seeing what the gap is between the 4 seed and then the 5 seed and 6 seed as we're kind of talking about right now?
I think it's more important than it was 2 weeks ago because Kansas hasn't played very well. Like, Houston would still have a home game still does have a home game against Kansas on March 3rd, where I think 2 weeks ago we thought of Kansas more highly as a protected seed candidate rather than more like a 6-7 seed as we see Kansas now. So I think Houston's game against Texas Tech, it's their last regular season game against a protected seed. I think it has more value than it might have before because of just kind of the waning quality of the remaining opposition.
Brad, what are your thoughts on this whole situation?
Yeah, I think this is Houston's toughest remaining test of the season, just like Lucas said. I think if they could win at Texas Tech tonight, honestly, I'm going to give them the edge to get that final #1 seed. I really am. I think Houston is right there, and just like Lucas said, they could be a #1 seed right now. And what Kelvin Sampson has done with that program, once they entered the Big 12, nobody thought they were going to be. People thought they were going to be good, but no one thought they were going to be this good, be the best team in the league. It's been unbelievable what he's done. And in terms of the other 2 seeds, Tennessee is right there as well. Tennessee's 9-5 against quad 1 opponents, which is, we look at Florida. Florida's 5-3. The metrics are a notch below, but very close. They have great wins at Texas A&M, beat Florida. They won at Louisville. I mean, they have a ton of great wins. So those 6 right there, I think we're in a good spot where your #1 seeds are going to come from those 6 teams.
Yeah, definitely in agreement. It feels like yeah, I'm in agreement there as well. I wanted to ask both of you guys, and we can stick with Brad and go back to Lucas for this. Where do the conference tournaments stand in all of this? Obviously, it's on the horizon coming up here shortly. How do you kind of balance how much the committee values a certain conference tournament versus another conference tournament? Obviously, the SEC tournament is going to be a lot more difficult to win than the Big 12 tournament per se.
Yeah, so one thing I feel like we've learned over the years, if you're a team that nobody is talking about heading into the conference tournament, and I'm talking about a team like Texas A&M a couple of years ago, who they weren't really in the mix, made a deep run in the SEC tournament, and they were still left out of the field. Those first couple games in conference tournaments, they matter. They definitely matter, especially if it's between 2 bubble teams. The team has a chance to play themselves out, play themselves in. I think once you start getting to the semifinals and finals of those big conferences, they don't really seem to make that much of a deal. I think they should be more of a big deal. I think the committee should have contingencies, but it doesn't appear that those last 2.5 days before Selection Sunday matter a whole lot. But you want to put yourself in a good position heading into the conference tournament, and if you're able to, I think avoiding those bad losses, I think is extremely important, especially for those top tier teams. But as far as being able to move yourself up a whole lot, I wouldn't bank on it. Let's put it that way.
Lucas, see you sharing a similar sentiment about the conference tournaments?
Yeah, Brad, I want to run a theory by you that I was thinking about earlier today. And that's, you and me and bracketologists around the country, we do this stuff every day. We look at it every day. We make seed adjustments basically every day. And the committee's doing that, during their meetings during that week. And I think for us, sometimes we lag a little behind in oh, that was actually a better win than we thought. And we view that as it's one game out of 30. And so does the committee. The conference tournament games are 1 or 2 games out of 30 sample sizes. And I think that we lag behind even in February. We lag behind in January if games like that mean a little bit more than we thought they did, and we didn't want to overreact. And then we get to March, and we feel like the committee doesn't react enough. And maybe we're the ones overreacting. I think it's tough to be you look at it and okay, we don't really know what this means in the grand scheme of things because they might actually be adjusting to those, and they just don't mean as much because maybe they're lagging a day or two behind in what that really means.
No, that's a fair point. And I will say this, when you're leading the conference, for example, a team like St. John's, while they only have 3, we saw it on in the top 16 reveal, they were number 4 seed. While they only have 3 quadrant 1 wins right now, they're first place in the Big East. And that the numbers don't take that into consideration. But that's important. That's a big deal. Winning the Big East regular season is something that I think the committee is really going to take into account, which is why they've gotten the benefit of the doubt, even though their metrics, well, that's all their metrics, but maybe their quadrant numbers aren't matching up with a lot of other teams that are in St. John's seed vicinity.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. All right, before we take a quick break, anything from either of y'all to add on the 1 seed topic? Anything you don't feel like we've covered? Or I know we've kind of established the fact that there's seemingly a top 6 and then in everybody else, and only 2 teams outside of the 1 seed region really have a realistic chance at this point to play themselves in.
Yeah, I'm ready to flip the narrative this year on it being the bubble is weak and more the top is darn strong. These 6 teams are really, really good.
Yeah, and I would even with that, I think the top 4, 5, even 6 seed lines are pretty strong. Just looking at it compared to the resumes, and it's been really difficult to figure out 4 seed, 5 seed, and 6 seeds because a lot of these teams are starting to accumulate some really good wins. I think that's just going to make for a great tournament, as it always is.
And then Brad, to stay consistent on that topic, with the strength of the 4s, the 5s, and the 6s, do you either of you guys view really there to be a drop off as we're talking the top 6 teams? Do you feel like there's a point somewhere in the middle seed line where there's a big gap between the quality of teams, maybe between the 6 and the 7 line, 7 and the 8? Or do you feel like there's not a large gap or an abnormal gap, depending on how large it usually is?
So for me, I would say once you start getting to, the 8 seeds, 9 seeds, you start seeing some underachieving teams that kind of have the talent, but they're not achieving to the level that people expected them to. Teams like UConn and Illinois. But once you start getting to the 9 seeds, I think a lot of resumes are just in question, and 10 seeds, and beneath that, there's just a lot of I know Rocco likes to say empty calories on their resume, and it's a great way to put it. There's so much missing from these profiles, and there's still time for them to add to it. But they're in the field based on having good metrics, but not necessarily strong numbers within their quadrants, and not necessarily strong overall wins. So that's kind of where I see the separation for me. But things can still change.
Yeah, I have a few cuts as part of my bubble watch stuff. I have to put the lines in between these teams at some points to categorize them. So right now I have a little bit of a gap between my first 7 and the rest of the 7s, and I have another gap mid 9 seeds, and then I have a gap right after the 10s where I feel like there's a little bit of a difference between those teams. And obviously, at this point in the season, those lines are pretty blurred and can change as the night goes. Like, let's say, like Nebraska, I currently have as my last 10. There's a gap right there. Let's say Nebraska loses tonight. They're no longer in that gap. Like, they're now in the group below that they were not this morning.
Yeah, I think that's good stuff. All right, we're going to take a quick break here, and our breaks are brought to you by Rhythm. Whether you're a seasoned bettor or aiming to dominate your college basketball betting, March Madness pool, NBA, golf, and more, Rhythm gives you the competitive edge. Don't wait. Download Rhythm today and transform how you bet, bracket, and enjoy college basketball. On the other side of a quick break here on Fielding the 68, we are going to do bubble teams and react to last 4 in, first 4 out, and next 4 out. Don't miss it and stick with us.
College basketball fans, are you ready to take your hoops game to a new level? Whether you're a seasoned bettor or just trying to win your March Madness office pool, Rhythm is here to give you the edge this season. With data-driven predictions for every single college basketball game left on the schedule, Rhythm helps you maximize your bets. And as March Madness kicks off, Rhythm's insights will help you spot those plucky Cinderellas that you know are going to shake up the NCAA tournament. But that's not all. When Selection Sunday rolls around, let Rhythm's AI-powered bracket generator do the heavy lifting for you. This is the same AI tool that performed 35% better than the average ESPN bracket last year. And here's the best part. Rhythm pairs perfectly with our Field of 68 expert analysis, giving you the 1-2 punch that you need for the rest of the college basketball season. So don't wait. Download Rhythm today and get ready to see college basketball and your betting results in a whole new light.
We welcome you back into Fielding the 68, brought to you by Rhythm. I'm Faxon Childress alongside Wachtel and Lukas Harkins. We're continuing to talk NCAA tournament picture and bracketology as we're now about to dive into our bubble teams. Lukas, we can start with you here for last 4 in. Talk us through how you're seeing the bubble picture after this past weekend.
Yeah, I think this was one of the harder last 4 ends of the year so far, and that's what makes it fun, right? I think I really had a long conversation with myself about the last, especially the last 2 or 3 spots and a couple of teams on the outside for me. But my last 4 in today, I settled on being Arkansas, Texas, Indiana, and Wake Forest. For Arkansas, the home win over Missouri pushed them back in the field for me. Not by much, but they're top 50 in every metric. They're only top 40 in one of them. They're sub 500 against the upper 3 quadrants. They're 4-9 in quad 1, 1-2 in quad 2. That said, all 4 of their quad 1 wins are in the elite upper half. When you're looking at bubble squads right now, Arkansas overall record and metrics are pretty similar to the rest. But its edge is it's hard to find many teams that can match their wins over Michigan, Kentucky, Texas, and Missouri. For Texas, the loss at South Carolina was a blow and nearly put them on the wrong side of my cut line. And I wouldn't have a problem really with anyone who does. Quality metrics are still in their favor, like Arkansas, under 500 against the upper 3 quadrants. Again, like Arkansas, anchored by some pretty top-end wins. They got the wins over Missouri, Texas A&M, and Kentucky, all at home, but they're really, really good wins. As for Indiana, I really thought the win over Purdue would just kind of bring the Hoosiers into my first 4 out, maybe first or second team out, but they still snagged the spot for me today. Resume metrics up to 43rd. They have strong wins to their name. I wrote a few weeks ago about how to not write off the Hoosiers because metrics were still standing by them despite that stretch, 7-8 losses. Since then, they've won on the road at Michigan State. They got a home win over Michigan. They're not safe, but they've pushed themselves this far, and they're favored to win 3 of their final 4. Wake Forest was really tough. This was the spot that I had the hardest time with, was the last spot in the field. They have the best resume metrics of a team hovering on the cut line. They're average 38th across KPI, SOR, and Web. They're also 500 against the upper 2 quadrants, 13-8 against the upper 3. They have 2 quadrant 1A wins. That's a little sneaky. One of those was on the road over a non-tournament team in SMU, or at least a non-tournament team right now in SMU. It's a big one. They won over Michigan, but Wake's only has that 1 win over the projected field. This is a real big case of how much does the committee really value those resume metrics. 38th, it's really high, but that's really all Wake really has going for it right now.
And Brad, talk to us how you see the last 4 in picture as of right now.
Yeah, we definitely have some similarities in terms of our last four in. I have Arkansas, Indiana, and Wake Forest. Instead of talking about everything Lucas talked about, I'm going to talk about their remaining
Hey,
schedules.
you took my bubble baby and put him in your field.
I'm going to talk about their remaining schedules before I hit up and talk about my last team in the field. So Arkansas, remaining schedule. They have a very manageable remaining schedule. They get Texas, they go to South Carolina, they go to Vanderbilt, and they get Mississippi State at home. So I like what I'm seeing for Arkansas's chances to reach the NCAA tournament. They're just 5-11 against quadrant 1 and 2 opponents, which is not particularly good. But 4 of their quadrant 1 wins, they're strong wins. They beat Kentucky on the road. They beat Texas on the road. They beat Michigan on a neutral court. They beat Missouri. So I like their chances, especially if they could take care of business at home, win at South Carolina. I don't know if that's asking too much. I don't think it is. I think they'll be in the NCAA tournament if that happens. And then in terms of Indiana, Indiana's got Penn State at home, at Washington, at Oregon, Ohio State, another manageable remaining schedule. So let's see what they can do to remain in good position. And then Wake Forest stays in the field because they're 33 strength of record. I thought after their last two losses they were going to be knocked out, but look, everything is relevant to this year's bubble. So you can't just say, well, this loss has to knock them out. Well, somebody has to take their spot, and right now nobody's taking it. And then finally, my last team in the field, after careful consideration, was Boise State. Boise State, 46 net, 3-5 quadrant 1, 6-6 quadrant 1 and 2. They have 3 wins over the field, including wins over St. Mary's on a neutral court. That win is looking better and better by the day. They beat Clemson, another win that's looking great, and they also beat New Mexico, another team that's towards the top of their conference standings. Issue with Boise State, which gave me some pause, strength of record is only 58. They do have 2 quadrant 3 losses, but they have a huge game coming up against Utah State on Wednesday. It's a game I think they need to win to remain in the field, but if they do win it, I really like their chances to become an at-large bid when it's all said and done.
Yeah, some interesting stuff right there, and obviously that Clemson win aging very, very well for Boise State amongst others. Lucas still kind of shaking his head. Lucas, do you feel like your bubble baby got stolen? Is that what that was?
A little bit. I really liked. I partially kept Boise State out of the field today because of how much I wanted to put them in the field. I was like, I really like this resume in terms of just like those wins over Clemson and St. Mary's have really aged really, really well. They're 10-8 against the upper 3 quadrants. I think that they've got it there, but as Brad pointed out, their resume metrics are behind a team like Wake Forest, and that's eventually where I ended up battling on was the resume metric average for Wake. But Brad's point, Boise's got that game against Utah State this week. They only lost by 2 at Utah State. They're at home. They've only lost 1 home game this year. Today, Wednesday, whatever it is, if Boise State wins against Utah State, they'll be in my field.
So, Lucas, was that long, hard conversation with yourself, Wake Forest versus Boise State, just connecting the dots here?
That's correct.
All right, Brad, let's shift gears forward and take a look at your first 4 out. Since you've got Boise State in the field, who's just on the other side of the cut line for you?
So the team that I have knocked out is Texas. Texas, obviously losing at South Carolina, I mentioned it earlier. You lose to a team that's winless in league play. I know it's just a quadrant 2 loss, so, doesn't kill their overall resume that much, but it's still a big deal, especially since Texas, while they do have some good victories, I wouldn't say they have any big-time, over-the-top wins away from home. Their best win is at Oklahoma, away from home. And while it's a good win, Oklahoma right now with a loss over the weekend would have been out of the field. Texas is 7-11 against quadrant 1 and 2 opponents. They, strength of record is 52, KPI is 61. They're just like one of those meh resumes at the moment, middle of the pack SEC teams. And I couldn't put them in over Boise State. Boise State has had fewer opportunities and they've, quite frankly, they've done more. Which is why I had it like that. And then as far as my other 4 teams out, other 3 teams out, Ohio State dropped to 15-13 overall in 7-10 in Big Ten play. look, teams just don't make the NCAA tournament that are just 2 games over 500. So for me, that was just an automatic removal from the field. If Ohio State can go and beat USC later in the week, I think there's a good chance they go back into the field, because there is a little bit of a threshold based on the NCAA selection committee's history on who they put in the field and who they don't put in the field. But they have a lot of work to do, and it's been a rough couple of weeks for the Buckeyes. And then finally, SMU, I talked about them a lot prior to this. No opportunities left in the regular season to really move the needle. So they're going to have to win out and make some noise in the ACC tournament. And then finally, Xavier is hanging around. Look, Xavier just has 1 win, or 1 in 9 against Quadrant 1 opponents. That 1 win is a big win at Marquette. It's a very nice win. Not as good as it maybe once seemed. I mean, right now Marquette is more of a 5, possibly even a 6 seed at the moment. So still a great win. Look, Xavier still has 1 significant opportunity left in the regular season against Creighton. Got to win that game. Got to take care of business against the rest of your conference schedule. And then I think Xavier is right there. Don't want to lose out early in the Big East tournament. And then it's, what do these other bubble teams do? I think they'll be squarely in the mix if they can win out and win at least 1 in the Big East tournament. But look, somebody's got to make a move down the stretch. And the only way to do that is to beat quality opponents.
Lucas, talk to us a little bit about how you're seeing the other side of that cut line.
Yeah, pretty similar stuff. Boise State, I'm sorry, they were my first team out, as you guys are well aware at this point. Ohio State was my second team out. It really is hard to look at a team with wins away from home over Purdue and Kentucky and put them on the wrong side of the cut line. But that's kind of just where they are right now. Brad pointed out they're 9-13 against the upper 3 quadrants. That isn't going to cut it. Precedent is not in their favor in that respect. But as far as the Big Ten goes, a very tough league. They have a pretty manageable closing schedule to potentially shrink that difference. They go at USC, where they're a favorite by 1 on KenPom. They get Nebraska at home, where they're also a favorite on KenPom. Then they go at Indiana, where they're just a 1-point dog. Like, there's a possibility for them to go 3-0 there, and that changes what we talk about Ohio State. And then we come back to those wins over Purdue and Kentucky again, and like, ooh, those look really great. We've talked a ton about SMU on this show. They're still 15-7 against upper 3 quadrants. But obviously they don't have a Quadrant 1 win. They played poorly in their Quadrant 1 losses, but they do still have opportunities in the ACC tournament. Should they get Duke, Clemson, Louisville, and North Carolina, those are all top 50 teams that would be Quadrant 1 right now. Similar take to Brad with Xavier. North Carolina just kind of stays in the mix. Their metrics are pretty darn solid for what their resume is. They're top 40, they're top 50 across everything except KPI right now, where they're 52nd. But 1-10 in Quadrant 1, that is a disqualifier right now. That needs to change. They've taken a ton of at bats. They've swung and missed repeatedly. They have a quad 3 loss to their name. They've won 3 straight, but they've lost 3. They've won 3 straight, and they're favorites to win their next 3. If they do win the next 3, they'll be at 20 wins heading into a home game against the number 1 seed in Duke. That would have a lot of juice to it, a lot of eyes. And for a bubble team, if you can get a lot of eyes on a big win, that's something that I think can play a big factor, especially for a big brand like North Carolina. They're still my 4th team out, but I would say a pretty decent margin between SMU as my 3rd team out and North Carolina as my 4th right now.
Yeah, and it starts tonight for UNC, obviously. Got to handle business against Florida State and got to handle business in the next 3 games in general. And then you get up to the stage of that Duke team. On the topic of North Carolina, before we look at all 3 consensus with last 4 in, first 4 out, and next 4 out, what does a conference tournament team mean to a team like North Carolina, who's 1-10, I think it is right now in quad 1 games? If they could get on the stage to where they're playing a Clemson, a Louisville, a Duke, and bolster that resume, could that be something that could play them into the NCAA tournament?
I don't think it matters unless they beat Duke at home.
Brad, what are your thoughts?
I would agree with that. Got to win out the regular season. The Duke win is not like, oh, if we win this game, we're going to the NCAA tournament. No, that's not the case. They have to beat Duke at home. That's a non-negotiable. And then in an ideal world,
extremely easier said than done.
Of course. And in an ideal world, you get to face a Clemson, a Louisville, a Duke again. I think if they could somehow face Duke again in the conference tournament and beat them again, well, they're going to get in if that's the case. I really believe that, assuming they win out. But yeah, so the problem is with the ACC, there's limited opportunities. So you're not guaranteed to face any of those top tier teams right away. So you got to get by some of the teams in the middle of the pack first before you could get there. And there's no guarantee that North Carolina would do that.
To quickly address a comment I saw in the chat, also comparing Ohio State with North Carolina across the upper three quadrants. Ohio State's 9-13 against the upper three. North Carolina's 12-11. It is above 500 in those games. It's just that 10 of those losses have been in quadrant one. They're 11-1 across 2 and 3.
Yeah, and also probably worth noting as well, that non-con slate, second game of the season, going on the road to number 1 Kansas. Obviously, that hasn't panned out to be the pedigree game that many anticipated. But then they played 3 of the 4 1 seeds in the non-con, and then they played Duke as well, who's going to be a 1 seed. So they definitely scheduled up. They just didn't win any of the games, and we could be having a lot different of a conversation with just even maybe one more win in that quadrant 1 against one of the upper echelon teams in the country right now for North Carolina. So we'll see how everything unfolds down the stretch, but got to win tonight to kick things off and continue the winning streak and keep a good thing going. All right, let's take a look at our consensus last 4 in. Then we're going to go consensus first 4 out and next 4 out. So throwing it back to the last 4 in of Arkansas, Indiana, Wake Forest, and Texas for the consensus here on fielding the 68. I'll give the floor to both of you guys. Anything to add on these 4 teams?
No, nothing in particular. Yeah, I think this is Lucas's 4. Like, look, Texas is one of my first 4 teams out. I get the reason why both Lucas and Rocco, who I'm assuming Rocco has them in, the metrics are better than Boise State. KPI is a little bit of an outlier right there, but I don't think that would harm Texas as much as you might think it would. But I think it's very close, and it's like Lucas had mentioned, it was very challenging to figure out the last couple spots. Some teams are doing enough to enhance their profiles, and other teams are just, lollygagging. They're hanging around. They're just losing to. They're having a lot of Q2 losses, not having monster wins. They're just doing the bare minimum and not really giving us a reason to do much with them in as far as movement goes.
Lucas, anything to add before we go to consensus for the first 4 out?
No, those are my 4. I stand by it as the 4 right now. I think that Texas is certainly a team that is getting a little bit of a boost from just having 4 quadrant 1 wins, as opposed to some of those teams. Boise only has 3, for instance. So I think that they get a little bit of a boost there. But I don't have a problem with Brad having Brad or anyone else on the bracketology committee, like having them out right now. I certainly think any of these 4 teams you could have in or out, and I wouldn't have a problem with it.
Yeah, it seems like there's a lot of congestion right now. Let's take a look at the consensus first 4 out here. The teams that are just on the wrong side of the cut line, Boise State being the first team out. Then you got Xavier, Ohio State, and SMU, who's still going to be searching for that quad 1 win that I'm not sure they're going to get. Lucas, we'll give you the floor here first. Thoughts on the first 4 out?
Yeah, 3 of these teams were in my first 4 out. Xavier I just have as my 5th team out right now. So they're pretty much right there as well. I had them just a touch behind North Carolina because North Carolina has 1 more win against the upper 3 quadrants. North Carolina's 12-11 versus Xavier being 11-10. Not a huge big difference there. I think those teams are really close. North Carolina just has better metrics across the board than Xavier at this point in time. And as Brad mentioned, Xavier's win at Marquette isn't looking as crystal fantastic as it did earlier in the year. So I think that we're going to see Xavier still in that mix as well. I think these are the right teams. I think Boise being the first team out it is a step ahead of those other 3 at the time.
Brad, anything to add on the first 4 out before we look at the next 4 out?
Just Boise State, a little qualm with that, but other than that, no, I'm good with it. And the other 3 teams are in my first 4 out.
Big game on the horizon this week for Boise State against the Aggies. We'll see if they can take care of business. Could be the difference between making the tournament and missing the tournament for Boise State. So definitely a big game there. Now, 4 out here on field. Here, break it down. George Mason, North Carolina, San Francisco, and Georgia, who's really just been on a steady decline the past 2 months, it feels like, and are holding on to those wins over Kentucky and Oklahoma back-to-back back in January. Brad, we can start with you here. What are your thoughts on the next 4 out?
Yeah, just looking at these 4 teams, and I'm fine with the 4 that are here right now. I don't see a path for George Mason, unfortunately. The Atlantic 10 just does not provide enough opportunities, and they had a chance this weekend at VCU and came up short, unfortunately. So I think it's going to be a rough go of it for George Mason if they are unable to win the Atlantic 10 tournament. And then as far as North Carolina goes, we've talked about them plenty. They're still alive because the bubble is so weak. So they're hanging around for now. San Francisco, again, another team that I just don't see it happening with them. Georgia, I give a chance to just based on opportunities. I know Georgia gets to play. They have some really tough games left that would move the needle for their resume, and they would really have to. They need some of these games. I know they play Florida at home next, and that's probably a must-win game for Georgia. If you're these SEC teams, the league is so difficult. If you're losing games at home, you're in big trouble. Georgia gets Florida at home next, because then they have to go to Texas. Then they go to South Carolina, who just beat Texas, and then they get Vanderbilt at home. So, look, it's not the most challenging, but a win over Florida would really boost them. And I think they can, if they can go, if they beat Florida, win at South Carolina, and beat Vanderbilt, does that put them in play again? I think it does. But that's probably what they're going to have to do at the minimum.
Yeah, good stuff as always. Brad, Lucas, how are you seeing this next 4 out picture?
Yeah, I think I'm with Brad on George Mason. They're a team I've had in my next 4 out for the past couple weeks in that 5 to 8 range. They dropped out of there for me after the loss to VCU. I mean, I think as a 1-to-1 comparison of teams on the bubble right now, SMU is a team that we have pretty consistently out across the board, and a lot of people question why SMU is even in the bubble mix. And if you just do a straight comparison between SMU and George Mason right now, very similar resume metrics, 48 versus 47. SMU is almost 30 spots higher on average across the quality metrics. Neither team has a quadrant 1 win. SMU's 15-2 against quadrants 2 and 3. George Mason is 12-2 while also having a quadrant 4 loss that SMU doesn't. So, if you're going to take a team without a quadrant 1 win right now, it's probably going to be SMU. I have no issues with the rest of those teams there either. I think if there's a team that I'm highlighting this week as this team could emerge in the next 4 out pretty quickly, that's Santa Clara. They already beat Gonzaga on the road. They beat Gonzaga at home. They take that. That'd be their 7th quadrant 1 or 2 win of the season. They'd be 7-7 in those games. They're not quite out of the mix yet. They're a team that I'm at least intrigued by in terms of having what is to the committee still a top 10 net team at home.
We're going to take a quick break here on Fielding the 68, brought to you by Rhythm. Whether you're a seasoned bettor or aiming to dominate your college basketball betting, March Madness pool, NBA, golf, and more, Rhythm gives you the competitive edge. You can identify mid-majors and underdogs that can upset the field and shake up your bracket. Don't wait. Download Rhythm today and transform how you bet, bracket, and enjoy college basketball. Final segment of the program on the other side, where we're going to do some team deep dives and talk about games throughout the course of this week. Stick with us on Fielding the 68.
If you haven't heard by now, we have partnered with BetMGM for the season. We'll be using BetMGM lines to make all of our picks, and we'll have special offers for the listeners and the viewers of the Field of 68. Bet insurance tokens, odds boosts, and what I love, a nice parlay boost or two here or there. Be sure to keep your eye out in the app for the Field of 68 specials that we'll be running throughout the season as well. So go download the BetMGM app to sign up today.
We welcome you back in, everybody, to Fielding the 68, brought to you by Rhythm. It's time now for some team deep dives before we go into games to watch tonight. I'm Faxon Childress alongside Brad Wachtel and Lukas Harkins. We broke down the bubble picture, we broke down the one seeds, and now it's time to talk about some teams that are intriguing at this point in the season. Brad, we can start here. I'm not sure what to say about what happened in Madison Square Garden other than it was a beatdown of epic proportion from the Blue Devils onto the Fighting Illini. I like Brad Underwood. I like Illinois. I always feel like they've got a pretty good chance to make decent runs in the NCAA tournament. But at this point, this is a bit of an alarming trend. Where are you at it on Illinois at this point in the season?
Yeah, so right now, Illinois has definitely tumbled over the course of the last few weeks. I had them as high as like a 4 seed at one point, and now I have them down to a number 8 seed. I'm not going to say it's panic time just yet. I mean, in terms of the way they're playing and after that effort at Madison Square Garden, yes, maybe it is panic time for them. But as far as their chances for the NCAA tournament, I'm not quite there just yet. However, they play Iowa next at home. And if they lose to Iowa at home, things could start to get a little interesting because then they go to Michigan, which will be a tough game. And then they finish with Purdue at home, another tough game. So now all of a sudden, you lose out. You're 17-14 heading into the conference tournament. Lose a game there, and Illinois is out. So there's definitely a path for them to miss the NCAA tournament. I think if they beat Iowa, I think they're fine. I think they'll get in. Everything is relative to the rest of the bubble. That's kind of how I see it trending if Illinois is unable to win another game. I mean, and they wouldn't be deserving of a bid, to be honest with you. I think everybody would agree with that. But right now, if you just look at their resume, their metrics are still top 40 as far as their quality metrics. Their predictive metrics are top 25, 6-10 against quadrant 1 opponents. Beat Wisconsin. They beat Missouri on a neutral court. They won at Oregon. They beat UCLA. They beat Arkansas on a neutral court. They won at Indiana. Those are some really good wins. So as far as what they've done, as the committee always says, it's total body of work. How you play lately is not relevant on whether or not you should be in the NCAA tournament or not. And Illinois played great, the first half of of the season, and they've definitely tailed off. But look, a team like Oregon started off amazing and then went under 500 in Big Ten play, and then suddenly won at Wisconsin. So there's still time for Illinois to turn it around, but they're running out of time, and they might want to start in their next game against Iowa.
Lukas, any additional thoughts on the Fighting Illini?
Yeah, I mean, they have 6 wins over the field. I mentioned it. They have quality wins to their name. They're 11-11 against the top 2 quadrants. The 11 wins is quite a lot in there. They're top 38 across every metric, top 25 across all 3 quality metrics. Illinois is not playing well right now. Like that much is evident. A 21-point loss at Wisconsin, a 43-point loss in MSG to Duke. They're not playing good basketball right now. But from a pure resume standpoint, you're going to have to pick a lot of teams that are going to be in the field ahead of them. And we just talked about the bubble and the teams on the outside. It's hard to pick any of those teams over Illinois' overall body of work right now. I'm with Brad. I still have Illinois as an 8 seed, a team trending down for certain, but still as an 8 seed with their quality of wins at the top and still pretty solid resume metrics that paint the picture of a 6 or 7 seed.
Yeah, definitely an agreement there. Brad, we'll throw things back to you on this next upcoming team with Baylor, and then we'll give you the first dibs on the last 2. Lukas, talk to me a little bit about what's going on in Waco and walk us through a team that has lost 3 of their last 4. We mentioned earlier in the program, and you specifically, Brad, and why I wanted to get your thoughts on this, you mentioned losing to a winless team in a conference and the optics of that at this point in the season. Well, it was only win number 2 of the Big 12 slate for Colorado, who is near the bottom of the totem pole in that league. So how much are you kind of impacting that against Baylor after losing 3 of their last 4?
No, it's a great point, and it doesn't look good. I mean, Baylor is definitely not a lock at this point. They do have 5 quadrant 1 wins. Beat St. John's on a neutral court, which is looking better and better and better. Beat Arkansas on a neutral court, which has now turned into a good win. And they beat Kansas at home and West Virginia. But I wouldn't say they don't have any great wins on the road just yet, which is a little bit concerning. Their metrics, 37 strength of record, is still in decent shape, and their predictive metrics, are top 30, which is why their seed is a little bit higher than you might expect with that overall resume. And they also play one of the best non-conference strength schedules in the country. Another thing to keep in mind with their resume, though, they're just 4-9 away from home, which is an issue. So where does Baylor stand? They're just 15-11 overall in the season. That's a record that's starting to get a little too close for comfort. And Baylor finishes off a tough game at Cincinnati. That is by far, that's not a gimme, especially with the way Baylor has been playing on the road. And then they get Oklahoma State at home. Obviously, that's a must win. Even if you lost to Cincinnati, even if you beat Cincinnati, if you lose to Oklahoma State at home, then their position in the NCAA tournament is in significant trouble. Then they go to TCU, and then they get Houston at home. So it's not the easiest of schedules. They need to get a split, I think. They need to go at minimum. If they go 1-3, I think they're going to be in trouble. But if they got to go at least 2-2 to really feel good about their chances. But their resume is far from complete, and that which is why they're hanging around. And for me, as of today, I have Baylor as a 10 seed. So they're getting close to that cut line. They're just 1-9. To top it off, they're just 1-9 against UConn opponents.
Yep, that's a good point. Lucas, what do you have to add on Baylor and kind of what you're seeing right now? Brad's got them on the 10 line. Where do you have the Bears as of right now?
They're my last 9 seed right now, so still holding on to single-digit territory, but not by much. I think there's 2 ways to look at that 1-9 Quadrant 1A record. 1-9 is not good, no doubt about it. That they've had a lot of chances against top-end teams, and they haven't won those games. But they're 15-2 when they're not playing Quadrant 1A games. Like, that is Quadrant 1A is the top of the top, toughest games, and they're 15-2 when they've been able to play somewhat easier games. And that to me screams an 8, 9, 10 seed range. The team that's not good enough to really beat those quality end teams, because if they were, they would be a higher seed. But they take care of business against everyone else where they play them, when they play them. They've done a pretty good job in that. And the road victories are lacking, but both of those Arkansas and St. John's wins were at neutral sites, which helps things with their ability to play outside of Waco.
Lucas, we'll start with you for this next team. Another interesting case study. Dan Hurley, UConn. Where are you at on the Huskies as of right now after a rocky month of February?
Still a 9 seed for me as we stick on the 8-9 lines with these teams that have been dropping games. The thing with UConn is that, one, they're the back-to-back national champions. I don't think that you can look at their team sheet and not that some part of that still exists. Whether it should or not, different story. But I'm sure that there's the name brand of like, okay, this team's won back-to-back national championships. They're probably better than what their numbers say. And the numbers say they have the 42nd best resume in the country on average, and that's not very good relative to other teams. That said, they're 4-1 in Quadrant 1A. They've had chances against the best, and they've played really well in those games. They're 9-8 in Quadrants 1 and 2. They're 13-9 across those upper 3 quadrants. That's definitely a leg up over those teams around the cut line or even the double-digit seeds. I still have them on the safer side of my 9 seed line, as I mentioned earlier. I had a little bit of a cut, a little bit of a drop off halfway through my 9 seed line. They're on the plus side of that 9 seed for me. They are right there as my second 9 right now.
Brad, what do you have to add on the Huskies? Another team that's kind of Jekyll and Hyde for the past month or so.
Yeah, I have UConn as an 8 seed at the moment. Like Lucas had mentioned, they're 4-1 against Q1A opponents. Strong number. They're 9-8 against Quad 1 and 2 opponents. I was ready to even put them higher, and forget about the loss to St. John's. With the injury to Liam McNeely, and he missed a number of weeks, and UConn, they weren't the same team as they once maybe were. Fine. So you kind of give them the benefit of the doubt in that case. But then they go and they lose to Seton Hall with him in the lineup. So I think that kind of ruined any chance that they had of kind of getting a better seed than what their metrics dictate. So that was a really costly loss for them, which is why I have them in the 8-9 range as well.
Yeah, and if they do fall in that 8-9 range, if you're the 1 seed, that's got to be a little bit of a brutal draw, as Lucas alluded to. I don't know how much I value the name brand stuff, but I do still think it is worth acknowledging that they're the back-to-back national champions, and they've won back-to-back national championships, and they've gone on deep tournament runs. Like, that has to play a little bit of a factor into at least how you view them going into the tournament.
Yeah, I wouldn't say they're a team that I wouldn't say that I'm a proponent of taking name brand into effect. There just kind of seems like there'd be inherent bias there when you see UConn on the team sheet relative to other things. That when our job is to project what the committee is going to do, I think that could play a factor, and therefore leads me. It's not hard to make an argument on to Brad's point. It's not hard to make an argument in favor of UConn with their 4-1 record in Quadrant 1A. It's pretty easy to push them being a little bit seated higher than maybe their numbers say they should be. But I still have them as a 9 right now. But I could see them as high as a 7, as low as a 10.
And then speaking 7 through 10 range, don't know what to do with them. Does this sound familiar? Lucas, we'll come back to you for the Zags, who are the last of our team focus. We covered this a little bit earlier. They've had a lot of opportunities to get big wins, but they're without a Quadrant 1 win versus November 18th. We reiterate the point of your resume is in totality, and it's over the course of an entire season. But as of late, the Zags just haven't been knocking off those Q1 opponents.
Yeah, I'm with you. Hard to argue with that. I think they're a team that's really hard to see, like really, really hard. As we talked about earlier, 46th in resume metrics, but they fit the bill of a protected seed, top 4 seed, if you just play it to affect their quality rankings. This is a team that I think probably warrants more of a 10 seed range, but I think that the committee is not going to want to punish a 7 seed or even a 2 seed at that. With a team that's top 12 across the 3 quality metrics. So I think they're going to get a boost in that respect. I still have them on the 9 line right now, but I could really see them much higher than that, just based on the fact that, like, does a 1 or 2 seed really deserve to play a top 12 team per metrics in the second round? I could see the committee upgrading them from there. As I said, though, I still have them as a 9 seed right now. The lack of quality wins is evident. But if you look at head-to-head stuff, they do have a dominant win over Baylor. They also beat San Diego State on the road. Those are wins that are going to give them a little bit of an edge should those 3 teams be lined up against each other on the S-curve, as well as a neutral site win over Indiana, who's now put themselves into the field.
Brad, what are your thoughts on Gonzaga?
Per se, but last year Gonzaga finished 3-6 against Quad 1 opponents and 7-7 against Quad 1 and 2 opponents, and they ended up getting a much better seed than I thought they would get. They ended up getting a 5 seed. Now they had wins at Kentucky last year, at St. Mary's. They had some really good wins, but in terms of their metrics, their strength of record was 22, which is above and beyond. I'm not saying Gonzaga's going to get a 5 seed now. KPI was 46 last year. Okay, so I think, but their predictive metrics were average about 15 last year. So I think those predictive metrics were definitely, which is worse than it is currently, exactly. And their KPI is actually better than it was last year. So I think ultimately Gonzaga is going to get a better seed than anybody anticipates. I would just like them. I'd be more confident if they could, win some more games against some quality opponents, and then I'd be fine with moving them up my seed line. But until then, they're in the 8, 9, 10 range.
Yep.
Before we go to games to watch, I guess that brings the question for Gonzaga before we wrap up these team deep dives. How close are they to the cut line? And how thin is that margin towards the bubble for a team like Gonzaga? Obviously, we talk about the fact that they will likely be seeded higher than many anticipate, but it does pose the question because they've got some chances to lose games that they're not sure they can afford to lose from a results perspective at this point. Brad, we can start with you. What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, they're definitely getting closer, but with the way the bubble stacks up right now, I don't see it just yet. Their last 2 games of the season at Santa Clara, at San Francisco are both Quadrant 1 matchups. So technically a loss, if they lose both of those games, it's not the end of the world. I think winning one of those games would be nice to kind of put them in an okay position. But let's just say, for example, what if they lose these 2 games and then lose to a team that's nowhere near, the at-large conversation in the conference tournament? I mean, there's definitely a possibility this team gets left out. So there's still work to do.
Lucas, you view it pretty similarly?
Yeah, I think that the two final games being against quality teams who are at least somewhat on the outskirts of bubble conversation is important to mention because it means Gonzaga's, even if they lose, that their quality metrics are unlikely to drop a ton because they're playing teams that are rated pretty well. In particular, Santa Clara is rated as a top 60 team across the three quality metrics, whereas San Francisco's top 70. Those really aren't bad teams. For Gonzaga, it's not going to drop much in quality rankings, even if they were to lose those games. And I think I don't have the number in front of me. I'm playing totally off my head and what's in my notebook from past years. I think the highest rated team across quality metrics to miss the tournament was ranked 25th across the three, and currently Gonzaga's 12th. And I don't see them dropping outside of the top 15, given what they have remaining in their schedule. Or at least I don't see them dropping out of the top 20. So I think that those metrics alone are probably going to be enough to carry them. It's hard to see a team that might have a slightly better resume metrics, but ranking in like the 50s, getting in over a team that has a team like Gonzaga that might have slightly worse resume, but other numbers, quality numbers, which are on the team sheet for a reason, show them being a top 15 team in the country. I think they get in.
I also think they get in for what it's worth, but obviously not a bracketologist,
And safely.
just the host here. Yeah. I mean, it would be shocking to me if Gonzaga didn't win a game or two when they inevitably feel like they will get in. I will say that. It feels like that's one of the teams that has a chance to turn it up in March, especially with past success and who their coach is. So let's take a look at games to watch tonight. Obviously, there's two that steal the show, and then we can talk a little bit about matchups throughout the course of the week. I know Boise State, Utah State's already been thrown out there. Brad, we can start with you for this.
Yeah, so I would say that in terms of the big matchups this week, obviously tonight, Michigan at Nebraska is a big one for Nebraska's sake. Got to take care of business at home. You say take care of business against a team like Michigan. I know I always say that, but Nebraska's a great home team. So if they can win the rest of their home games, they'll be in the NCAA tournament. Because winning on the road in any league is so challenging. As far as some other games that I think are some big time, and I think there's a number of games that I think we're going to learn a lot about the bubble, a lot about some of those middle of the pack seeds throughout the course of this week. Some other games, I mentioned Florida at Georgia earlier. Is Georgia going to be alive for a bubble bid? Well, you got to beat Georgia. You got to beat Florida. TCU at West Virginia. Look, TCU lost at Cincinnati the other night, and I still think they're alive for a bid, but they're probably going to need to win this game. If TCU can win at West Virginia, I think they'll be right there in play for a bid. And then I'll give you another, let's see. Let's go to Wednesday. Vanderbilt at Texas A&M. A win by Vanderbilt, and they almost punched their ticket. Okay, winning on the road against a top-tier team in the SEC like A&M would do wonders for that resume. And the last team I'm going to mention is, let's go with Oklahoma. Oklahoma, who's now 4-10 in SEC play after they picked up a quality win over the weekend. They get Kentucky at home on Wednesday in a game that Oklahoma's got to win their home games. Look, they can get in with a 7-11 record in conference play. I think there's a chance they get in at 6-12. I wouldn't say it's a great chance, but I think they're in the mix at least. But they got to win their home games, and beating Kentucky at home, especially if Kentucky's not going to be at full strength, is something that they need to do.
Yeah, definitely in agreement there. Brad, Lucas, what are some games you got your eyes on over the course of this week?
Yeah, I was just deleting the ones that Brad mentioned as I go, so I'll just rapid fire go through the ones that I got left on my list. That's Baylor at Cincinnati, Gonzaga at Santa Clara, New Mexico at San Diego State, Texas at Arkansas, Ohio State at USC, as mentioned already, Utah State at Boise State, San Francisco at Oregon State, and Penn State at Indiana.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see Indiana if they can close strong and keep a good thing going. Obviously, the road win over Michigan State, then the big one over Purdue with the 40-year anniversary to the day with the Bob Knight chair, and the big second half in Assembly Hall. So feels like they're turning the corner potentially, but we'll see if they can keep it up down the stretch. Brad, Lucas, thank you all. Great job as always. Everybody in the audience, as always, we appreciate you guys. This has been another installment of Fielding the 68 brought to you by our friends at Rhythm. We will see you on Friday, everybody. Obviously, a lot going on throughout the course of this week. Enjoy the college hoop slate.